This study is taken from my book, Understanding the Book of Revelation. Welcome to Lesson 11. In this lesson, we want to look at Chapter 8 and see the newly rebuilt Jewish temple in Jerusalem. Timeline. Chapter 8 takes us to the middle of the Tribulation. The Antichrist has invaded Jerusalem and has taken the temple. He desecrates the temple by setting up an image of himself on the altar. Matthew chapter 24, verse 15. And after the desecration, the seventh seal is opened. Well, let me try to put it into perspective. Jesus takes the deed to the earth from his Father's hand and begins the process of eviction of the earth. Under each of the seals are steps of things that will happen in that eviction process. These judgments come in three sections, and as it moves from one series of judgments to the next judgments, they get worse for those who are on the earth until at the last of the third series, Jesus and his army comes back to the earth. We talked about 6 of the 7 seals of the very first series of judgments. Those were found under the seals on the deed. It started before the tribulation with the Antichrist coming to the political stage, and then the war of Gog and Magog happens. The Antichrist will lead Israel and this military coalition that Russia has put together to fight against Israel. According to Daniel chapter 9, when the peace treaty of this war is signed, that begins the 7 years of tribulation. Under the third seal begins the first half of the tribulation. As we have seen, common food gets very scarce, while the rich have plenty to eat. The Antichrist will lead in a worldwide rationing to meet the need for food, and all goods having to take the mark of the Antichrist, which is 666, on their forehead or on their wrist. Then under the fourth is the death of 1/4 of the world's population, which today would be about 1.4 billion people. I think this will come from the Americas and people outside of the newly rebuilt Roman Empire. Under the fifth seal, people who were saved during the first half of the tribulation are asking God, how long before you bring justice to the earth? He moves the timeline up to the midpoint, or 3.5 years have passed since the tribulation begins. Under the sixth seal, the Antichrist will move into the city of Jerusalem, which breaks the peace treaty that he had brokered for 7 years. He moves into the temple and removes everything that has any part of worship to God. Then worship is directed to him. That brings us to the opening of the seventh seal. Revelation chapter 8, verse 1. When he opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. When the first 6 seals were opened, John either heard or saw something. When the 7th seal is opened, there was silence for about half an hour. While half an hour is not a long period of time, when you stand in anticipation of something in absolute silence, it can seem like forever. The silence in heaven seems to be the calm before the great storm that leads to the end of the earth as we know it. Under the 7th seal, the worst of the woes or judgments are unleashed. They will be unleashed in 2 sections, the trumpet judgments and then the bowl or vial judgments. Immediately after the silence, John sees the 7 angels ready to carry out judgment. The trumpet judgments revealed under the 7th seal will begin to be unleashed over the next few chapters. Verse 2. And I saw the 7 angels who stand before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets. A trumpet was given to each of those 7 angels. Then another angel, having a golden censer, came and stood at the altar. He was given much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. After the 7 angels received their trumpets, another angel appeared carrying a censer made of gold. A censer is the vessel that the high priest would use to take burning coal from the golden altar, and then he would put incense on the coal, which caused a sweet-smelling smoke to fill the air. The smoke and smell of the incense represents the prayers reaching up to God. The angel was given a lot of incense to offer because they represented the prayers of everyone who has had saving faith in Jesus Christ. Chapter 8, John sees the smoke of incense described by the word all, indicating that those were the prayers of everyone who have had saving faith being heard. This is unlike where John sees believers from the tribulation period under the throne offering prayers and wondering when judgment will start. Verse 4, and the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints ascended before God in the angel's hand. Then the angel took the censer, filled it with fire from the altar, and threw it to the earth. And there were noises, thunderings, lightnings, and an earthquake. The angel throwing the censer filled with fire upon the earth represents God's answering the prayers of all believers to execute judgment because of their persecution and all of the evil and sin of earth. When it hit the earth, it made loud noises like thunder and gave sights of lightning. Then a great earthquake happened. The worst troubles the world has ever experienced is starting at the middle of the tribulation. Verse 6, so the 7 angels who had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound. Now the 7 angels will begin to sound their trumpets individually, announcing different parts of the judgment. The first 4 parts of judgment affect elements of nature. They affect only 1/3 of the earth, which leaves 2/3 of the earth for the rest of this final judgment. The first angel puts the trumpet to his lips, the first section of this final judgment. Verse 7. First angel sounded, and hail and fire followed, mingled with blood, and they were thrown to the earth. And 1/3 of the trees were burned up, and all green grass was burned up. Notice hail and fire happens just after the sounding of the first trumpet. Ice mingled with fire falls from the sky. The ice and fire was also mingled with the blood, and together it burned up 1/3 of the trees. But notice it burned up all of the grass. Some believe this is a description of a nuclear war. Verse 8. Then the second angel sounded, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea, and 1/3 of the sea became blood. And 1/3 of the living creatures in the sea died, and 1/3 of the ships were destroyed. Then the second angel put the trumpet to his lips and sounded, more impending judgment is on the way. John describes a great mountain burning with fire being thrown into the sea, which could describe a volcano. 1/3 of the sea became like blood. 1/3 of the earth's sea creatures was killed as a result of the blood. The angel number 3 sounds his trumpet then. Verse 10. Then the third angel sounded, and a great star fell from heaven, burning like a torch, and it fell on 1/3 of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is wormwood. 1/3 of the waters became wormwood, and many died from the waters because it was made bitter. Then John sees a huge star burning like a torch fall and affect 1/3 of the rivers and springs of fresh water on the earth. Some suggest this might be a meteor, but there is no reason not to believe it's literally a falling star. Now 1/3 of the earth's water supply, fresh and salt, has been polluted and can't be used. The name wormwood is a curious name for a star. There is no evidence by astrologers that there was a star named wormwood in John's day. Wormwood appears to have been a medicine used at this time in history to come from the wormwood plant. It was used to get rid of worms in a person's intestine. It was very bitter tasting medicine. Wormwood as a medicine tasted bad, but it didn't kill people, and clearly many people will die from drinking this polluted water. So if the intention of the name is to be identified with this medicine, the effect is the opposite to what the medicine was usually used for. Instead of healing, it killed. Then the fourth angel sounded the judgment cry. Verse 12. Then the fourth angel sounded, and a third of the sun was struck, a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that the third of them were darkened. A third of the day did not shine, and likewise the night. 1/3 of the earth's sources of light were darkened. Verse 13. And I looked, and I heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, because the remaining blast of the trumpet of the three angels who are about to sound. The King James and versions translated from it say that John heard a flying angel. The ESV and NIV and other versions which are translated from older manuscripts say that John heard an eagle flying. I personally normally can't hear an eagle or angels fly. It seems that this is a picture of an angel flying authoritatively like an eagle. The angel shouts to the earth that great woes are coming. The word woe is represented 3 times to emphasize just how terrible the remaining 3 trumpets will be for those who inhabit the earth. The summary. This chapter begins with 30 minutes of silence, and then devastating judgments begin to unfold. This judgment will lead to the end of the world as we know it. Incense is burnt in a censer which represented God receiving the prayers of all who have been saved. Their prayers are for justice and holiness in the world, and it's about to be answered. 4 of the 7 angels have sounded their trumpets announcing judgment. These first 4 judgments affect the natural elements on the earth, such as hail, fire, and blood mingled together. This mixture of fire burns 1/3 of all the trees on the earth and all of the grass. Then a huge mountain falls and pollutes 1/3 of all the seas, killing all life within that 1/3 and destroying the ships that sail on them. John then sees a huge burning star fall which pollutes 1/3 of the fresh water supply on the earth. John sees, after the 4th trumpet sounds, 1/3 of the earth's source of light darkened. With 1/3 of the water supply tainted and 1/3 of the source of natural life darkened, it will stop the growth cycle of food in 1/3 of the world. After the sounding of these 4 trumpets, John hears an angel flying like an eagle across the sky saying, Woe, woe, woe on the inhabitants of the earth. This angel was warning about the severity of the last 3 trumpet judgments, which are the last of this first part of final judgment.